P. Sainath started off, he studied in Royal College in Chennai, took a degree in history from JNU, and went into journalism. And his first job was with actually a magazine. He eventually became Rural Affairs editor of the Hindu, and the reportage that he did over a period of 18 months, I think, resulted in his first book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which is now essential reading for anybody interested in India as a developing state or the status of Indian agriculture, or just to understand rural areas in India better. In 2014, he set up an organization called the People's Archive of Rural India, or PARI. And for those who are interested in PARI, there's a session later on today at 7 p.m. where he will talk to us about PARI specifically. Okay? His latest venture is to talk about the unseen heroes and the unknown heroes of India's freedom struggle, which is what he's going to be talking to you about today. He's also a Magsaysay award. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming P. Sainath.
Thank you, Bharat. Since we have so many young students here, let's begin with a discussion, with a question from me to you. I'd really like to know where we all stand around that issue. So you are in your 75th year of independence, celebrating it at great expense, at least at the governmental level. 110 crores on just the website, Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, and that's the first tranche. My questions to you, which actually morph into one question: what are we celebrating? What was that independence about? Why did you seek independence from the British Empire? And in a sense, I'll push it into one question to you. What did British colonialism do to India and Indians that you had the largest freedom struggle of its time, and maybe of any time, who knows? A huge thing like that. So the question, what did British colonialism do to India and to Indians? It's not a rhetorical question, I expect answers. I've been a journalist 43 years, but a teacher for 38 of those. Okay, so, yeah. Come on. What did British colonialism do that you needed to escape it? What brought people together across a very diverse, often internally antagonistic spectrum? What did it do? Why are you celebrating 75 years of independence? Independence from what? Come guys. Yeah.
The drainage of natural resources, any sort of wealth, anything that could be distributed to the people in the subcontinent.
Drainage, just for your colleagues, is a drainage of natural resources and wealth from India. Yes, absolutely. Do you have any measurement or metric of that drainage, the scale of it? And, I'm saying, suppose the drain was 1x, it has some implications. If the drain was 200x, it has a different set of implications. So what did it do? What was that impact? I mean, this is, what you've said is absolutely true. It's absolutely correct. I'm just asking you to elaborate on it. Don't worry about that. Nobody does. I mean, getting an accurate pinpoint figure on anything like this is impossible. But you have broad ranges of figures.
Just over the period of since the British East India Company to the transition of the empire, through trade, through the setup of factories, through the agriculture, and through the shift to, sorry, I'm forgetting the
Essentially, you're saying there was a very large drain on multiple fronts, which true. Anyone would like to add to that? Give me a picture of what the drain was. What were the other costs? Now, when you have such a large drain, it has an impact on the population. What were the human costs?
The Bengal famine and loss of lives.
Yes, absolutely true.
So when it was...
But how many famines were there that we count in British times? From the Great Bengal Famine of 1770s to the Great Bengal Famine of 1942, not 43 as it's commonly written, it was 42. And your wonderful imperial controlled media like the Statesman take credit for breaking the story when it was being reported in the underground Bengali language press for full 360 days before the Statesman deigned to take notice of it. Something which its editor, former editor, writes in his thing. He thought that our wonderful administrative officers would solve the problem. So it took them a year to start reporting the famine, and they start in 1943 and everyone says Bengal famine 1943. It's not true. Yeah, but you're right, that's an important landmark, but it was the very last of the famines. And once we kicked the bastards out, there were no more famines. Right? So yeah, that's a factor. Tell me, how many famines were there? What was the impact of these famines? Yes?
I have a point about the armed forces. So those armed forces, so soldiers of
Armed
India,
forces.
those who were serving under the British Army, so they were sent to different parts of the world during World War II. So during World War II, so basically that was the huge loss of Indian people, those who were serving under British.
They served, you're right, it's a very important point, but they served overseas in dozens of wars. Okay? They were sent anywhere, not just World War II. You lost 90,000 people in World War I, and we count, and these historians and others of that thing, they go by records which only document soldiers' lives lost. There are many allied occupations traveling with an army. Cook, Batman, not the one in the movie, but the guy waiting on the officer. These Batmen. All over the world in the British Empire, many of the army Batmen were from India. There were a hell of a lot of civilians in the logistical chain of the British Army. So you get a figure of 90,000, that's the soldiers. There were tens of thousands more who died who are not counted in those casualties of imperial wars in which Indian soldiers fought. Yeah. And there were many, I'm saying it's World War I, it's World War II. In Indonesia, by the way, up to my friends told me that up to the 70s, up to the 60s, 70s, mothers would scare little children by saying, we'll give you to the Sardar. Yeah? So, we made quite an impact. Right? Yeah. Come on. You know something about why you're celebrating your wedding? Yeah.
Okay. I think the word celebrating, at least for me, it's not really celebrating it anymore. Why we needed independence from the British, the idea of self-rule, think the one thing that connected the masses, and I think across sections of society, was this idea of, at that time, a country of one's own where we can govern ourselves. And an idea like that was able to, and of course the father of the nation was able to bring in the importance of villages and how rural communities were equally important in carving out this idea of India. And I feel an idea such as big as that could have been able to carry everyone together, because if we look at it, with independence, while certain communities could, have opportunities and get ahead with their lives, it didn't really mean any drastic change for most. So I think this idea of self-rule was the one thing that brought everyone together.
I hear at least 4 or 5 points you've made that I totally agree with, and which are, should be a part of our understanding of what happened. But, self-rule, there was something that many who went beyond the idea of self-rule. Yeah. Purna Swaraj, all these things came up, and many revolutionary uprisings happened. But why did people who were living as disparate, disaggregated, whatever you want to call it, societies, why did they get that idea of self? Essentially, the first step was throwing out the colonial ruler. Why? Why did they feel the need to do that?
To get the equal opportunity.
Did they, sorry, who said that? Yeah. Did they pose it that way? Yes, in a sense, yes, and in the sense of what's reflected in your constitution. They fought for certain ideas. Yeah, but I'm still asking you to tell me what they did to Indians that made them say, we prefer to rule ourselves, thank you. Yeah.
I particularly feel that they wanted to experience what it feels to be like free. They wanted to experience freedom. They always felt that even if they were engaged to do something, they were not asked for their consent. They were somewhat forced into it. And there were a lot of things that were done on an upper level, so they were not even aware as to what was happening with the land, or how were laws changed, or how was tax levied.
Good. What were some of those major changes in the laws that exploded across your country? And also another thing comes up, a question comes up from what your valid observation is. The idea of freedom, that are freedom and independence the same thing? Is self-rule and freedom the same thing? Is our Swaraj and Azadi the same thing? Every one of the 15 people you'll find in my book, now I just do a little plug for my book. Every one of the 15 people in the book tell you repeatedly the difference between independence and freedom. The first line in the book is from a leader of the underground Tufan Sena. In 1943, the Principality of Satara, it was a princely state actually. Satara was a very large area. It included today's Sangli district as well, Satara district as well, and a few other territories. You're from Maharashtra? Someone was nodding, so just, anyway. In 1943, Satara and some other parts of India, in revolts which you have never heard about or read about, but which were very large, Satara declared independence from British. It declared secession from the British Empire. And that government was a government of farmers and laborers. Farmers, laborers, clerks, clerical staff. The head of that Prati Sarkar, the provisional government, he was a Talati. A village accountant and records keeper. Nana Sahib Patil. He was a Talati. Though of course he could hold that job and fight for self-rule or whatever he was fighting for. The 1943, it wasn't only Satara that did that. Chittagong did that. You heard of the Chittagong Armory raid. It was one event in a very large number of events around Chittagong. Koraput, the Adivasis of Koraput, Lakhan Naik, they led very major uprisings against the British. Your independence was not brought to you by a bunch of Oxbridge returned elites. It was brought to you by the struggles of ordinary people in this country. Captain Bhav his actual name was Ramchandra Shripati Lad. I'll show you later a 2-3 minute video of him speaking at age 94. He died at age 100, less than a year ago. In one line, the first line in the first page of the book is Captain Bhav. We fought for two things, freedom and independence. We achieved independence. That's it. That was his pronouncement on the struggle. We fought for freedom and independence. We achieved independence. Every one of them says this in different words, in different ways, that we fought for freedom and independence. So thanks, it's an important point, that the notion of freedom, every one of them will tell you, freedom was a much larger project than independence, and one that maybe never gets completely done in one lifetime or several. Yeah. Anyone else? But I'm still asking, what did they do? British sportsmen, fair play, stiff upper lip. Yeah. When I ran away from Madras University, actually, I was going to say I left Madras University department. I was in a very good college in Loyola. Then I went to the University Department of History. From where you don't leave, you escape. At least in that time. Where they still told us to read Vincent Smith, the greatest of the imperialist historians, racist, as Nazi as you could think. Anyway, and you still had literature and books and textbooks speaking of the sun never sets on the British Empire. Now, I prefer the Irish approach to that. Okay. My grandfather, I come from a freedom struggle family and I'm very proud of it. My granddad was part of the Sinn Féin and the Easter uprising and all that sort of mischief in Ireland, where he was a law student. And the Irish had a different way of putting that saying across. The Irish revolutionary saying was, the sun never sets on the British Empire because even God can't trust those bastards in the dark. So that was the Irish approach to it, which I fully subscribe to. Yeah, but more, what did they do that earned them that, line from the Irish? What did they do? So they drained resources. How did they drain resources? What scale of resources did they drain? You can, by the way, you can speak at any time in this session. Yeah. You don't have to formally ghetto yourself into the last 25 minutes or anything. You can butt in any time. But you're not butting in when I'm begging you to. What did colonialism do to this country? How do you measure? What are the metrics that you use? What are the ways of, what was the human cost? Let me shed all the jargon. ask you that. Sorry?
No, I mean, one can look at the life expectancy.
Yeah, that's one very good indicator. There's one problem with that is, though it's terrible, the figures that you do get are terrible. They start from a period, 1880s, where the British have already been bashing around for a century. So the figure in 1880s was not what it was when the British arrived. It was much better. And we have some new research on that, out on that, by Jason Hickley, Dylan Sullivan in Capitalism and Extreme Poverty in the journal. Please read this paper. You can download it for free. Okay? It's in World Development, a peer-reviewed journal, and it is stunning. You won't sleep properly, that is if you understand it, because it's written in the academic language. Yeah, but no academic, as a journalist I speak, no academic ever uses a 2-syllable word where one with 9 syllables is available. So that's why we exist, by the way. Yeah? To translate their English into English. So what the life expectancy which you're talking about, we start getting serious numbers, robust figures from the 1880s because the first census is out. Okay? But therefore we know what the life expectancy was in 1880, 81, but we don't know how degraded it was in the preceding 100 years. Anyway, in 1881, in the 1880s, life expectancy in this country had been brought down to 37.2. What am I talking? Yeah, about 37. In 1880, it was already brought down to 26 years. In the next 20 to 30 years, British brought down life expectancy. By 1921, they brought it down to 21 years and 9 months. Incidentally, demographers, including British demographers, and even the classic demographers of the colonial times, W.S. Lilly, Digby, all these guys show you that at the time when the British arrived here, these are all rough. Data is never pinpoint and accurate. It gives us trends. Which is why I have serious problems with a lot of data worship. But the thing is, they find that at the time the British came here, life expectancy in India, which accounted for 18% of global GDP, was higher than life expectancy in Wales, Scotland and Ireland, and about similar to that of England. That was what the broad findings were by demographers across from 1880s onwards. They brought that to 21.9 months. First they brought it to 26 years by the time, otherwise the life expectancy would have been somewhere between 37 and 40. They brought that down to 26 years at the end of 100 years of British rule. They brought it down to 21.9 months by 1921. It's after independence that you see some recovery. By the way, they also brought down real wages dramatically. You never saw real wages go up under colonial rule. It starts from the 1950s. You had laws, when we speak of drain of resources, you had laws, including in the Bengal famine, where you exported food grain at a time of famine, but banned food imports. You set up the highest tariffs in the world, yeah, to crush Indian goods. By the way, when you say they set up factories, there was a hell of a lot of manufacturing in India, far more than in most European nations. And the drain of resources, the natural resources included things which you can't quantify, like wood. Nelson's fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar the ships came from wood extracted from the forests of Palghar and Thane in Maharashtra. By the way, many European armies had their swords forged in Maharashtra, steel.
Damascus.
Yeah, sorry?
Damascus steel?
Yeah, well, I don't remember what the name was locally, but it was forged in Maharashtra. The French also used those cutlasses which were forged in Maharashtra. Then you have, okay, let's look at this human drain of resources. Dadabhai Nauroji, heard of him? What was the book he wrote? Poverty and Un-British Rule, in which he evolved the theory of the drain, in which he said, but he was looking at exchange rates, he was looking at tariffs, he was looking at excise duties, he was looking at these things. He did the brilliant job. In fact, Gandhi called him my economics teacher. That's what Gandhi said of Nauroji. So it was a brilliant thing for the time, but it was restricted by the records he had access to. Professor Utsa Patnaik, have you heard of her? One person, okay. Professor Utsa Patnaik has calculated on as many fronts on which data is available or records are available, and gives you what she calls is an extremely conservative figure. The drain in British rule was $44.6 trillion. Trillion has 12 zeros. I can't accommodate that much in my head, but it's a number followed by 12 zeros. 12 digits. 44.6 trillion. Here we are today boasting that by 2025, of course we keep moving the goalpost, we will be a $5 trillion economy, etc., etc. No. The $5 trillion economy will come, and by 2030 now, they're shifting that. 10 times that figure was looted from your country. And some of it in an acutely short space of time, primarily between 1880s and 1920s. Imagine, let's say a fourth of it was taken out of in that period. That was the highest period of extraction. Let's say a fourth of it was taken out in that period. Say 11, you take $11 trillion out of anyone's economy, what do you expect would happen? And real wages crash. You ban food imports when you like, and then you create the deadliest crisis in food in India, linked, by the way, to our first globalization and the American Civil War. Now, how on earth did that happen? What could possibly be connected? All of you have read or heard of Lancashire and Manchester. These were the greatest super monopoly profit-making industries in the planet. Okay? Why were they making such high profits? Their input costs were the cheapest ever. How? Why was the input cost cheap?
Stolen from here. Stolen from here.
No, not first. The main input was cotton, and that came blood-stained cotton from the slave-owning states of America. Black slave labor created the raw material so cheap. Ultimately, that is the dream of the capitalist manufacturer. Input costs must be close to zero. Raw materials must be close to zero. They had that for 40, 50 years. Then the Americans very unreasonably went and had a civil war. So the flow of blood-stained cotton to Britain collapsed. What did the British do? As the British correspondent and journalist Claude Coburn said, it's, you know, when he used to write his copy earlier than other correspondents on the war front and say that the British are planning to do this, the British Army during the Crimean War, etc. They're planning to do this, they're planning to do that. 2-3 old veteran British correspondents. And when asked how they managed to do that, they said, just sit and think. What is the nastiest possible thing anyone could do? And you will find by morning they've done it. Yeah? So what did the British do when the flow of blood-stained slave cultivated cotton from America collapsed? They force cultivated cotton in India and Egypt. And the French did that in Africa, Western Africa. So what is the cotton forcibly cultivated in India primarily was in Gujarat, in the Vidarbha region, and in Madhya Pradesh. Okay. Now, if you look at the figures, Professor C.T. Kurian has given you in that Orient Longman's series, yeah, Globalization and Indian Capitalism. The export of raw material cotton in 1861 was next to nothing. Few thousands of bales, 40,000-50,000 bales. By 1865, it was exponentially greater. So a country that was a producer of finished garments, Dhaka muslin, Indian silk, Mysore silk, was now exporting raw material. Guys, even as early as 1840, even before this, the East India Company chairman proclaimed proudly in UK's parliament, in British parliament, this company, my company, has succeeded in converting India from a manufacturing power to a raw material exporting country. That's what they succeeded in doing. Now when you force cultivate cotton, it has to come at the expense of something. It came at the expense of food crop. It came at the expense of food crop. So you had a net decline in food production of over 10, maybe 10%, especially in those areas, at a time of fast rising population. Meanwhile, they had brought huge land tenure changes, 1793, the permanent settlement, etc. The great achievement of British colonialism in India was that they brought determinacy to land ownership and relations to societies where it did not exist. Indian feudalism was structured very differently from British feudalism. There was no, your Jamindar, Talukdar, Maharajas, the only names you remember are those who come after British, with British rule. Before that, the Jamindar, Talukdar, he did not own the land. The state owned the land. The Mughal emperor held the land in lieu of the state. He did not own it personally. Okay? So, but then when you come here and you're going to impose taxes and you go to everyone and say, pay me a tax, and he says, I don't own the land. You know? Well, the British came here, what did they didn't come here to expand their philately collection, right? Or promote neighborhood tourism. They came here to loot and plunder, which they were extremely good at, the Brits better than anyone else in history, and they did that for 200 years. Now, the withdrawal of that kind of level of food production from the Indian economy led to a cycle of famines. But even earlier, in Purnia, in Bengal, a giant famine took 12 million lives. And Warren Hastings proudly writes to the directors of the East India Company the following letter. Please tell me that I have not left it behind. Well, anyway, he wrote to the East India Company's Board of Governors, notwithstanding the decimation of fully a third of the population in the Bengal province, which included Bihar, Odisha, everything. Notwithstanding the decimation of a third of the population, we we managed to raise rents. If the rents, you would assume that given the chaos, that the rents would fall, that the rates would fall. That they did not was owing to the rates being held up violently, that is the word he uses, to their former standards. Between that 1776 and 1943, British India sees 31 famines. 31. The first Bengal Great Famine was 12 million. The Dojabara famine, the Skull famine, 11 million, and so on and so forth. 1876, the year of the Grand Victoria Darbar, to which she never attended because she feared that that arduous journey across the seas would upset her digestion. So she didn't come. But it was the costliest party held in human history. How many guests were there? Any one of you read about that? 68,000 guests. Most of them aristocratic royalty. Now, I don't believe that a bunch of 68,000 royals showed up for the party with their backpacks, right? They came there with their entourage, each of them. The guys who fed the horses, the guys who cleaned the horse shit, all of this. There would have been 250,000 people assembled for the Grand Darbar at its different points and venues. And she issued very kindly this notice, her message a year later. We trust that the present occasion may tend to unite in bonds of close affection ourselves and our subjects, that from the highest to the humblest, all may feel that under our rule, the great principles of liberty, equity, and justice are secured to them, and to promote their happiness, to add to their prosperity, and advance their welfare are the ever-present aims and objects of our empire. By the way, 1876, the year it was the costliest darbar, got even Nero's parties faded into, obscurity compared to the kind of expenditures, the hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling that went in preparation over years. 1876 saw a famine that took at least 8 million lives. Between Madras and Mysore, 140,000 people died in 1 week. These numbers are differently computed, but there's only one book, one history book, that makes the connection between the Darbar and that's Mike Davis's late Victorian Holocausts. Other books cover the famines, yet other books cover the Darbar. Nobody makes the linkage between the two. If you look at the general run of history books, Victoria's Darbar and its fallout have, they remain, but for Mike Davis, they remain a secret of history. Call it Victoria's original secret. Yeah? So this was the situation, and tens of millions of people die in famines, tens of millions. Millions die in war after war, fought, in the capture of various kingdoms, etc. And in 2023, you attack your political opposition for making anti-India, anti-national speeches in Oxford, and at home you lower your national flag in mourning for the symbol of that colonial power of 200 years, Queen Elizabeth's death. What sort of insult was that to those who fought for this country's freedom? You lowered your flag. It wasn't a speech in Oxford. You lowered your national flag, by the way, isn't about, the national flag isn't just about It's not a bunch of colors which you like and prefer that you splash onto a cloth. It is the expression of your national ideal, of your unity, of your diversity, of your culture, of everything. And that's why we had a law called the Flag Code, which ensured that the Indian flag can only be made of khadi. So what did our Vishwaguru do? They changed the flag code so that you could make it of polyester and have Har Ghar Ka Tiranga. Now you know who has that quantity of polyester, right?
Polyester prints.
Yeah, well actually I call it the Reliance China flag because that's where the polyester came from. Do you know that hundreds, perhaps thousands of India's weavers went bankrupt in the last year and a half? They didn't get a single order. There are 2 days on which khadi weavers make money: Republic Day, Independence Day. From 2 months before they start getting orders. They didn't get a single official order. But we lowered the flag. We didn't lower the flag to mourn them. We lowered the flag to mourn Queen Elizabeth. Okay. Anyway, you know, in the controversy over COVID deaths, and then I'm going to show you a couple of slides, videos, etc. And I forgot I'm supposed to plug my book. But anyway, that's what I came here all the way for. Yeah. But also that a new generation must discuss what their freedom struggle was about. Do you think it's important to know these things that I told you? 31 famines, tens of millions dying, famine deaths. Now, when you force cultivated cotton, you got famines over there, one set of famines. But remember, what you had a second wave of deaths there, because in 1865, what happened in 1865? American Civil War ended and American cotton returned to the global market. So prices tanked everywhere in the world. Millions died in the famines that followed. Okay, so it's your first great globalization tragedy. Imperial globalization. So real wages declining. Death rates went up. Already after 100 years of British rule, when we first start getting real figures, the death rate was already a horrible 37.2 per thousand. In 30 years, they made that 42.2 per thousand. In 30 years, they brought the death rate, so it was colossal. Okay, remember how we calculated COVID deaths? We never did because Vishwaguru said nothing happened in India. We were the best, the brightest. We saved lives all over the world. We set the example. So, there's been little or no debate over the fact that all the major institutional sources of the world, whether it's WHO, Johns Hopkins, Lancet, whatever, projected your deaths at between 2.5 million to 4.5 billion, and mostly above 4 million. Our figure is 486,000 and not a soul moved. Now we are not obliged to prove anything. The king has spoken. So let it be written, so let it be done, as they used to say in the days of the pharaohs. Okay, so you had, how do you calculate those deaths? You calculate excess deaths in a year because you have an idea of what the annual number of deaths in a given society is. So if your normal deaths in a year is 1 million and you have 4 million, you know what your excess deaths are. 3 million. Do you know that such calculations were possible with British data? The latest research coming from the paper I cited, World Development, Jason Hickel and Dylan Sullivan. This is what they have found, and it leaves you sick in the stomach, really. They're saying the upper reach of excess deaths under British rule could be 168 million. That's a huge part of the population, except don't forget that that time India included what is today Bangladesh, Nepal, everything. Pakistan, the whole works. But then they give you the, of course, how many deaths you get depends on the baseline you draw. So they give you different baselines and show you how it works. And they say somewhere in the vicinity of 100 million, not 168, which they give us the higher figure, died prematurely at the height of British colonialism. And there's a period between 1880 and 1920, I said the period of greatest extraction, not counting famines, 50 million deaths. Now guys, if 1% of 1% of that had happened in a European country, it would be called genocide. Remember Bosnia and, yeah. Here, it was the good old stiff upper lip guys who taught you cricket and fair play. Yeah. No one could trust those bastards in broad daylight, let alone the dark. This is what your freedom struggle was about. This is what people fought against. Life expectancy, death rate, your extreme poverty figure was 23% in 1880. We do not know how much of that was contributed by the British in the preceding 100 years. But Robert Allen, the economic historian, says they raised it from 23% to 53% on the eve of independence. Extreme poverty. You are talking about close to destitution. This is what you're talking about. So, people began to resist that. The first to die for freedom, the first uprisings, it was not 1857, please. Long before the first shot, 90 years before the first shot was fired in the north, Adivasis of Jungle Mahal, even today on agitation for recognition of their Adivasi status, the couriers, Adivasis in Jungle Mahal and Dalits in Jungle Mahal rose against the British Empire in what historians have very derogatorily called the Chuar Rebellion. The Chuar Rebellion is a peculiar Bengali term which doesn't mean just chor. It's chor plus niche, and that means that tells you the social composition of the revolt. 40 years they fought. The Adivasis were the first to die for freedom, the last to gain from it. They are still fighting the colonial apparatus called the Forest Department to this day. Yeah. This is what your freedom struggle was about. This is what people stood up and fought about. Now, very quickly about, the official website celebrating Indian independence, Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, 110 crores first tranche expenditure. It has, to its credit, not a single photograph. We can pull it up on the net if you like. Not a single photograph, not a single video, not a single statement, not a single biography, not a single quote, not a single picture of a living freedom fighter. Not a single one. Not a single photograph. My book is about living freedom fighters, except that 8 have died since the book went to publication. 1 died on April 6th, Telu Mahato, the oldest. You know what's heartbreaking for me is that you guys and coming generations will never get, in 5 to 6 years, there will not be a single one left alive. You and coming generations will never get to see, meet, listen to, hear, engage with touch a bona fide freedom fighter who brought your country independence. You're never going to have that. That's why I wrote this book. And incidentally, it's written for young people. As you'll see at the end of each chapter on each freedom fighter, there's a QR code which you can play with. I know how much you love doing that. And it takes you to a special page on PARI called Freedom Fighters Gallery, where you can see the same freedom fighters in videos, talking to you, addressing you. Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav doesn't have a single photograph of a living freedom fighter. It has many photographs. You know whose photographs. The same ones you got on your COVID certificate, the same ones you got on, on your ration card, the same ones which fairly soon will appear on every gas cylinder and bus ticket. That's all that happened. Now these people who didn't make it to Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, the characters. Look, there's one 98-year-old man. He was 97 when I met him and interviewed him last year, April 14th, Ambedkar Jayanti. This 98-year-old guy, Shobaram Gehrwar, a Dalit freedom fighter, also exploding the myth that Dalits didn't participate in the freedom struggle. It also comes from people who don't know the difference between independence and freedom. And Shobaram Gehrwar, at 98, I go to call on him. He says, Jeep hai, aapke paas? Haan Jeep. Any SUV, any kind of vehicle that moves is a Jeep. He said, I want you to take me to Garland Ambedkar statue. Ambedkar Jayanti. So I took him and quaking, I asked him the question. As a journalist, you got to ask stupid questions sometimes to be able to say that this is what he said. You know the great debate today, are you with Ambedkar or are you with Gandhi? Yeah? If you are with one, for the others you are a villain. And if you are with neither, you are a complete moron. So, he is a self-declared Gandhian. And I took him to the statue of Ambedkar and he garlanded it and I asked him, Shobaramji, how did you, how does someone like you, a Dalit, a self-declared Gandhian, choose between Gandhi and Ambedkar? He exploded. Why should I choose? You choose. Those principles of the Mahatma I admire and respect, I follow those. Those principles of Baba Sahib I admire and respect, I follow those. Who is anybody to tell me to choose? It showed a much broader spectrum of political interaction, intermixing and impact than today we have in our extremely polarized small thing where you can't unite anybody. And every day that he has a chance, he goes and sits in one old heritage building. Do you know, this is the Swatantrata Senani Bhavan, the freedom fighters hall of the 1930s and 40s. He is going there, this 98-year-old, it moves me to tears. He goes there and sits every day that he can as a signal to the real estate mafia in Ajmer that I am not letting you take this property, it's meant for future generations like you. And he asked me in return for the interview to get the Chief Minister of Rajasthan to take over the property by the state. He said, the day I die, he said, I've been offered 4 crores by the neighbor. He says, see those fellows looking over the walls. This is the center of Ajmer Central Market. You can imagine the value of the land. Look at that commitment, look at that spirit. The only guy, by the way, who completed education was a journalist. Some of you from Karnataka might have heard of H.S. Doreswamy. All these guys had, by the way, many of them are very cantankerous. 80 years of their lives they've been fighting something. So any sensitive question, they first blast you and then talk. Doraiswamy had a great sense of humor. Here's a journalist, compare him to the spirit of journalism you're seeing today. Doraiswamy had his newspaper, reluctant journalist, his family friend forced him to become a journalist when he was dying, said, I want only you to run my paper. So he ran it. Purva Vani, it was the voice of the people. Now look at this guy, he's in Mysore, he's under the Mysore Maharaja's rule. He goes and sets up near the border. Anantapur is other side under British rule. He moves, when they attack him here, he runs to Anantapur. He has only one newspaper. He registers the newspaper under 6 different names. So that if they close down the newspaper today, the very same newspaper with the very same content and the very same journalist writing for it appears the next day under a slightly modified name. People's Voice, People's Choice, People's Champion, 6 names he has registered. Look at the bloody spirit of it and the audacity. Yeah? Mallu Swarajam, whom I'm about to show you. And incidentally, who were these people? They were representative of hundreds of millions of others. They were farmers, laborers, cooks, couriers, homemakers, forest food gatherers. Yeah? They rose against the British Raj. Captain Bow was a tiny farmer, 2-acre farmer. Yeah. And that 2 acres would have God knows how many family members on it, living on it. Yeah. So, I'm going to show you Mallu Swarajam at age 84. And then I have interviewed her at age 92. The videos are all 3 minutes, 4 minutes, but I'm going to show you, and maybe I'll stop, even a 4-minute video I might stop halfway through, but I want you to see the characters. Yeah? Cherish them. They're gone in 5 years. Mallu Swarajam was a renegade. She was born in a landlord family in feudal Telangana. The day her father died, she and her brothers distributed their over 200 acres of land to the serfs and workers bonded to the family. They distributed that land. At age 11, by the way, because she came from a Jamindar family, she learned horse riding. Everything that young British ladies were being taught, our elite followed. She knew horse riding, she knew fighting, and because she was incredibly skilled in the use of weapons. Starting at age 11 to 13, 14, she was killing Razakars of the Nizam of Hyderabad's army with catapults. Again, I had to ask the dumb question, you'll see. In 2014, she was 84. Audience of 1,500 techies, okay? And she is talking, and then I ask her, knowing that I'm about to get my head bitten off, I tell her, Swarajam Garu, I know that the catapult is, by the way, the catapult is a weapon used on the West Bank today by unarmed people fighting Israeli troops. Okay? So anyway, but I had to play the patsy or whatever you want to call it, and said, I can understand this being used as a hunting weapon. I've seen Irulas, Bondas bring down birds. I've seen the Bondas stun a boar, a wild boar with it. So I'm not underestimating it, but was it really of much use as a close-in combat weapon? She flipped out. She stood up, rammed rod straight to the last day of her life at 92. She stood up, plucked out a slick shot, And one of the organizers is my poor friend Kiran Chandra of the free software movement, trying to help her. She tells them, keep out of it, you'll get hurt. And then she looks at the terrified audience and removes the cricket ball which she has put inside it and swings it without, I don't want to hurt you. Watch Mallu Swaraj.
ఆనాడు 4,000 మంది అమరులైన సామాన్యమైనటువంటి రైతులు హరిజన గిరిజన జనం మా కళ్ళ ముందే ప్రాణాలను అర్పించి పోరాడుతూ ఉంటే ఆ పోరాటంలో తుపాకులు అందుకొని రాళ్ళు అందుకొని వర్షాలు తీసుకొచ్చిన చూపించడానికి ఆడవాళ్ళు మగవాళ్ళు ఆ కూడలి దానికి వ్యతిరేకంగా ఊరుకు ఊరు ఏకమై గడిల మీద ఇలాంటి ఒడిశాలలో ఒక రాయిందులో బాగుంది. బహుశా ఈ బాల్ కూడా గట్టిగానే ఉంది, మీ దగ్గరికి వస్తే దెబ్బలాడుతుంది. అందుకని నేను పెడుతున్నాను. దీనిని పట్టుకొని తిప్పి 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 పోలీసులు
This is here at 92. That is her at age 16.
పోలీసుల మీద పట్టే ఎట్లా ఎదిరించారో చెప్పారు. ఆ తర్వాత మేము చాలా టెక్నిక్ చేసినాం. ఇంతంతే కాదు, కండలో కారం కొట్టడం, దుమ్ము కొట్టడం, మన కొట్టడం, పొడవని తీసుకుపోయి పొడవటం, ఆఖరికి నరకమన్నాం. మీద పడి అత్యాచారం చేస్తుంటే మరి ఎట్లా ఎట్లా అంటే ఎట్లా గిట్ట నరకమన్నాం. నరికేసి రంగాన్ని నరికేసింది. అది గెలిలా పోరాటం చేయండి జనతానే గెలిలా పోరాటం చేయండి. వాళ్ళే చేయండి, మాకు నేర్పించాలి. ప్రజలు వాళ్ళే నేర్పించి మరి ఊదరు.
I'm holding that there and moving to the next video. But Mallu, you saw what she, the last line. The people taught us. I asked her, how did you lead? A woman became the leader of all the armed Dalits in Warangal, Bayaram area. The Bayaram Warangal area was the hot spot of the uprising against the Nizam. At age 16, as a girl, she was leading male, female Dalits. I asked her, how did you do that? She said, we didn't lead. People made us leaders. The masses threw up leaders. They told us you can be leader. We didn't go and mold anything. They molded us. That was her statement. And when she, by the way, our young audience, 21 to 25, all techies, 1,500 from the company ThoughtWorks, and their family and friends. They asked her, it's all very well for you going around firing rifles and slingshot. What can people like us do? This lady, who didn't know a word of English, spoke to them for 5 minutes about Occupy Wall Street and told them those were also mainly techies. If they can struggle, you can struggle. Incidentally, I think that you should know, Occupy Wall Street lasted 9 weeks before they were all turfed out of Zuccotti Park. Your Kisan Andolan, which forced the government of India to withdraw 3 farm laws, lasted 53 weeks and won its battle. Yeah? We don't understand and appreciate the spirit of resistance in the Indian people. She did. Anyway, when they told her, you can use guns and slingshots, what about us? And she gave one of the most beautiful replies I've ever heard. Almost poetry. She said, you know, she said we were fighting for justice, and then they asked this question. She said, yes, the slingshot was my weapon. The laptop and the mobile phone are yours. Use those to fight for justice. She had 3 standing ovations from the audience. Next is 2 minutes of Shobharam Geharwal. And watch what he says about Gandhian who made bombs.
तो हम तो पकड़े जाएंगे भैया, तो मतलब बच्चे जाके छोड़ ही देगा। चंद्रशेखर आजाद और एक हुआ था, वो फैक्ट्री देगा, तो ले जाके फिर उन्होंने बोली तो हमें आपको ये शेड के बच्चे जो उन्होंने उसके साथ किया कोई में देखते थे और वो चिट्ठियों को भी अब डाक को पहुंचाना बड़ा मायना रखता था। तो हमारी टोली बनाई उन्होंने, हमें ट्रेनिंग दी कि भाई इस माफिक से आपको ये चिट्ठी हर जगह पहुंचानी है, बड़ौदा का देनी है, 10 अमृतसर को ना कोई किताब है जो पढ़ेगा कि हमने सारे क्या मालूम, ये सब खाने थे अभी गोबर स्वतंत्र संग्राम में आरएसएस
एक उंगली नहीं कटा।
अच्छा लगा, मैं इसको फॉलो करूंगा।
तो आप दोनों को मानते हैं? हाँ।
He went on to say, मैं दोनों, and then he said, I used to make bombs. When he was 5 years old, he escorted Chandrasekhar Azad to a hidden bomb factory in the Ajmer Hills. And he was very proudly telling me, मैंने दोनों नदियां में गया, गांधीवाद और क्रांतिवाद. So he had 3 streams, Ambedkarite, Gandhian and revolutionary path. Yeah. The next one, again, watch this character.
Now,
Captain Bob,
Chandra Sripati Lal,
who pulled off the biggest train robbery in our history in Maharashtra.
स्वातंत्र्याच्या चळवळीमध्ये वयाच्या 15-16व्या वर्षी मी सामील झालो. तुपात ज्यांना मी स्थापनच केली, त्याच्यामुळे सामील होण्याचा प्रश्नच येत नाही. ती सेना स्थापन केली आणि त्या सेनेमध्ये आम्ही जिल्ह्यातील सर्व लोकांना ट्रेनिंग द्यायला सुरुवात केलं. इंग्रज तर गेलंच पाहिजे, परंतु त्याच्यानंतर मिळणारं स्वातंत्र्य आहे ते जनतेचं स्वातंत्र्य झालं पाहिजे, हा आमचा त्यातला मुख्य दावा होता आणि त्या पद्धतीनं आम्ही आमचे प्रयत्न करत होतो. गाडी आने के पहिले 15 मिनिट या पत्थर रखा गाड़ी में आगे गाडी आली आणि गाडीने ते दगड धोटे पाहिले. गाडी रुकली गेली पाठीमागं आमची दुसरी फळी उभा होती. त्या फळीनं लगेच पाठीमागं गाडीला रोखली, गाडीवरती त्या रुळावरती दगड रोखली, गाडी जाग्यावर थांबली. त्याच्यामुळे गाडी पुढे येता येईना, गाडी मागं येता येईना. पगाराचीच गाडी होती, त्याच्यामुळे पगाराचे पैसे होते ते घेतले आणि निघून गेलो. भूमिगत लोकांना जीवन जगण्याकरता आणि ज्या ठिकाणी काही खर्च करावा लागेल अशा ठिकाणी खर्च करण्याकरता त्या पैशाचा वापर केला. घरगुती स्वरूपात कोणी पैशाचा वापर केला नाही. गाडी लुटली म्हणतात हा आमच्यावरती अन्यायच आहे. आमचाच पैसा आम्ही हस्तगत केला. गाडी लुटली नाही, आमचा पैसा आम्ही घेतला. पोलीस सुद्धा आमच्याकडे याला भेट होती. सरकारचा आदेश म्हणून रात्रीचा घोषणामा हात लावायची ताकद नव्हती कोणाची, अशी ती अवस्था होती. आणि औंधला तरी काय राजाच्या घरी असल्यासारखं करतो. राजाच्या घरी असल्यासारखं स्वातंत्र्याच्या, जनतेच्या स्वातंत्र्याच्या कल्पना भव्य आणि दिव्य आहेत. पण त्या पद्धतीनं आम्ही स्वातंत्र्य राबवतोय असं वाटत नाही. ठराविक लोकांची मक्तेदारी धरण्याची अवस्था झालेली आहे. ज्याच्या हाती ससा तो पारती अशी अवस्था झालेली आहे त्या स्वातंत्र्याची.
So guys, that's the kind of person who brought you freedom or brought you independence, as he says. Any questions, anything that you didn't, I invited you to interrupt?
No, I think this was better for students to tell something about Savarkar and his biography.
You know what? We're discussing freedom fighters here. Yeah. But anyway, my take on Savarkar was that he was a genuine, bona fide revolutionary till 1911. Okay? There's no questioning his credentials and authenticity till 1911. Then he gets thrown into Andaman's jail, and revolution looks distinctly unattractive. Then he writes 7 mercy petitions to the British monarch. One more cloying than the next. You know, there were others who, none of the others in Andaman's jail wrote those kind of petitions. There were others who suffered. None of them wrote. There were people who wrote. There were people like Gurmeet Singh Lakhon, founder of the Desh Bhagat Yadgar Hall in Jalandhar, the great Gaddari Babas, the Gaddar revolutionaries. They used, many of these guys, I don't know about Gurmeet himself, but he was in Andamans at that time. Mr. Savarkar was there, I think. They would write letters to the authorities, not so much to the monarch, but mother dying, father crying, you know, may I be released 3 months early, whatever. And what did they do when they were released? Gurmeet Singh Lakhon is released on something, and maybe a few days before his sentence. A week later, he is blowing up the British barracks at Hoshiarpur railway station. Yeah, he is using that leave of absence to resume the war against British imperialism. None of those who wrote these fake petitions ever offered to collaborate with the empire. Savarkar's petitions, with 5 of which are available to you in the National Archive, they have also been published in various books. A.G. Noorani's RSS History or Shamsul Islam's RSS book and other places. And Vinayak Chaturvedi has come out with a very useful and well documented book. Now, some of these petitions include begging for mercy and saying, if released, I will bring millions of misguided youth to the path of British constitutionalism and empire. Okay? This is your nationalist. Yeah. Now, he is released in 1926 and not put under house arrest, but restricted to the territory of Ratnagiri district. In 1926, a book, a biography appears. The Life of Barrister Savarkar. You can get that also, published by one of the Sangh Parivar houses, as all his books were, except, after 1911. Otherwise, I believe that Savarkar's 1857 is a book worth reading. That is the pre-conversion Savarkar. I don't know, you can't call it Ghar Wapasi, it's Ghar Chor Ke Gaya. So, but the pre 1911 Savarkar's book, 1857, is really a book worth reading. Yeah? And it recognizes the role of the Muslim minority of the book. It looks at the things of unity, the trends, it looks at that. There are many other things you don't agree with, but it was not a communal tract. Anyway, the book comes out, Life of Barrister Savarkar. It is authored by Chitragupta. That was a common pseudonym in the 18th and 19th centuries in India. Chitragupta, for those of you who don't know, was the official scribe of Lord Yama, the god of death, the lord of death. So it gave a writer a certain, power or credibility. You better take me seriously, I'm head honcho to the lord of death. So anyway, there was some discussion over who Chitragupta was. 1942, the book is republished. 26, it's proscribed by the British. It's republished again by a Sangh Parivar house, publishing house. And again there is a discussion. There is bound to be a discussion because the book, man, you have to read it. It gives hagiography a bad name. The far-seeing visionary, and all this sort of stuff. 1986, the book is again published, again with the debate who was Chitragupta, and theories are floated that Chitragupta was none other than C. Rajagopalachari. Now, much as I dislike Rajaji's politics and economics, much as I would not associate myself with C. Rajagopalachari, the man could write. Okay, many of us grew up on Mahabharata, Ramayana translated by C. Rajagopalachari. So we know he can write. There is no way that he could have managed to write so badly. Even if he had made a huge effort, he could not have done it. Then, but in the 86th edition, the publisher gloatingly reveals on the authority of Savarkar's own brother that the author pseudonym Chitragupta was none other than Savarkar himself. At which point I had to conclude that Mr. Savarkar had a very high opinion of Mr. Savarkar. Yeah, but let's talk about freedom fighters. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted you to elaborate on the idea of reconciliation that you brought up with Gandhi and Ambedkar, but throughout the book, the different people talk about, some take up arms, some follow the Gandhian ideas. So how do you deal with that while curating this list of people?
By the way, the reconciliation is really for our generation, which has been given a particular notion of the past. If you look at the correspondence, communication and exchanges between Gandhi and Ambedkar, one of the things that will strike you is the dignity with which that interaction occurred. Okay? They were not abusing